What's up, everybody? Welcome on into the Slate, a Thursday sports edition, as we will get ourselves into maybe a little bit of NBA later on. Very little, I would assume, because there's just the one game in the association tonight. Honestly, if Jeff Ulrich were here with us, maybe we could talk ourselves into a whole lot of hockey, because there's a healthy slate there. But football is king. That's the way it works, and Week 13 has arrived. I'm Adam Kaufman. He is Gary and Thorne. I come into this with extreme bias, being a Patriots fan, although probably not a whole lot of optimism as the Pats get ready to host the Buffalo Bills, a team they have dropped 4 of 5 against since Tom Brady left to go south, Garion, and most of those have not been that close, including, of course, a 30-point blowout loss in Buffalo in the playoffs back in January. So first meeting of the year between these two division rivals. Can I even say that? It's either the Patriots dominated them for decades, or now they're getting killed over the last few years. But what's your general feeling before we get into specifics, DraftKings Sportsbook and DFS, all of that, your general feelings going into tonight about this game?
Well, it's funny. I just started thinking in terms of, whether or not you could call this a rivalry or sort of competitive. And really, that's sort of a plague of this entire division in general. I mean, it's I'm not sure if it's every division. I know there's some weird like NFC West stuff where McVay can't beat Shanahan, but Kingsbury can't beat McVay. So there's like a whole thing that kind of goes around with that. But like the Dolphins have won, I think 5 straight against the Patriots, but the Jets can't beat the Bills or the Patriots, but the Dolphins can't beat the Jet. Like it's there's a lot of streaks going on in this particular division.
There was some tweet that made its way around not long ago, like, I don't remember exactly how it went, but it was something to the effect of, the Jets beat the Bills and the Patriots beat the Jets and the Dolphins beat and so therefore, like, the Bills are the worst team in the NFL.
Yeah,
it was that kind of thing, which we all know is certainly not the case.
But yeah, this should be a really interesting game. Obviously you have the recent history of Buffalo being relatively dominant in this matchup. The one win the Patriots have in recent history without Tom Brady, very wind-aided, weather-aided, odd game script, I think we could say, just in general, for that particular contest last season.
3 times.
So this should be interesting. I think Buffalo in general has been underwhelming so far this season, at least in terms of their massive expectations. The Patriots have had a really interesting year in the sense that you could choose to be very optimistic about where they currently stand and the fact that they are as close to a playoff spot as they are, considering some of the negativity surrounding the team, in training camp, about their maybe choices for positional coaches and offensive coordinators and whether or not they even have offensive coordinators and that whole spiel. But you could also look at some of their strengths and say, maybe there are some holes to be poked in those things. And I think that's kind of a fun segue into just Josh Allen in general. I think Josh Allen, the most expensive player on this slate, justifiably so. I am on the record. I am addicted to dual threat quarterbacks as my captain on a showdown slate. I just can't help myself. And, there's a reason Josh Allen scored more DraftKings points than any quarterback in the NFL so far this season. It's because he's 4th in rushing yards. It's just that simple. I mean, he brings that element, and even with the concerns we might have about his injury, you look through his game logs since he suffered that injury in week 9, he's had at least 75 rushing yards in 3 of the 4 games, and he scored at least 25 DraftKings points in all 3 of those games. He's rushed for at least 75 yards. If the Bills are being more cautious about using Josh Allen as a runner since his injury, it certainly hasn't played out like that on the field. So I still think Josh Allen's in for a pretty big performance tonight. And I think that maybe this isn't as tough a matchup as it might appear to be on paper.
So we're showing you obviously recent game log for Josh Allen here, and this game most recently Thanksgiving at Detroit, he went off 31 fantasy points. So it appears anyway, Gary, that the elbow troubles that everyone was concerned about are no longer really a thing anymore. But if we're looking at, again, Josh Allen, kind of some bigger picture stuff, this is they're 2-2 over their last 4. He is nobody's 100% healthy, but he's a little bit banged up. The team, other side of the ball, as it relates to the Patriots offense, they're missing multiple defensive starters. Von Miller among them, placed on injured reserve today. This Patriots team is one that is, I don't know, maybe encouraged off of the performance in Minnesota. Not the defense, certainly, but the offense.
Yep.
Mac Jones had
best
the best
game of the season for them.
Yeah,
in that regard,
by far, for sure. And they were actually moving the ball. Still need to be a little more productive once you get into the red zone, but that's a conversation we'll save for a little bit later. Jacoby Myers, while questionable, has said he is going to play, and Damian Harris is not, so certainly makes this a Ramondre Stevenson night, and we'll talk about him some more a little bit as well. They're missing multiple starters on that offensive line, which is potentially problematic for the Pats, but as it relates to Josh Allen specifically, and I just think it's kind of interesting. So Allen is, Pats are third in the NFL in pass DVOA. So this is like Daniel, our technical director, he just messaged us. He says, I've got Josh Allen and the Pats D in my season-long league. You and I were messaging, very late last night. How should we feel about the Pats defense? Because it's, on the one hand, Josh Allen, like, difficult to fade the guy, knowing what he's capable of, what he's done to this team in the past. The projection has him, that I was looking at about 22, 23 points. He's expected to be owned all in at about 70% of lineups, captain in about 15% of lineups as things stand right now, a few hours out from game time. Certainly is prone to the mistakes. He's got a lot of interceptions this year. This Patriots defense has shown it can perform well, but still, it's Allen, it's Diggs, it's McKenzie, it's Davis, it's Singletary. Like, you have so many weapons. Knox on the other side there for Buffalo, and this Pats defense has shown it can beat up on bad teams. This is not a bad team. So how inclined are you to go with them in DFS? Daniel, I would pick up a streamer. I wouldn't play the Pats defense tonight if you can avoid it, if you got the roster spot to play with. But DFS at $3,200, arguably the best value that's available to you in this game.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would say that my immediate reaction to opening up this slate and kind of just scrolling through the price list, it took a long time. It took longer than I thought it would take to get down to Patriots defense at $3,200, because the unit has performed as a top 5 unit, both in real life and in fantasy so far this season. But as you alluded to, Koff, when you start going through the game logs, it's pretty telling as to which performances were the best and why those performances might have been the best. And again, this is true of so many defensive units. Like, I'm not just picking on the Patriots in particular, but
Jets,
they've had
17, Colts 26, Jets 9, Browns 13, Lions 22.
Like, we're talking
a bad Packers team 11.
We're talking like a pretty incredible level of horrible quarterbacks they have faced so far this season. Like, Zach Wilson twice. They'll be the only team in the league who gets to say they faced Zach Wilson twice this season. Sam Ellinger in the game that basically got an entire coaching staff fired. You've got Jared Goff in there. You've got Jacoby Brissett is probably one of the best quarterbacks they've faced so far this season. And then the 3 times, I would say, let's throw out week 1 against the Dolphins. I mean, good defensive performance by the Patriots, but it was the first game the Dolphins had played with a new head coach. But the 3 games since week 1 where they've played, let's say, a top 10 quarterback. So you've got, and that's generous with Kirk Cousins, but he's a fringe top 10 quarterback. You've got the game against Kirk Cousins, you've got the game against Lamar Jackson, and you've got the game against Aaron Rodgers. In those 3 games, the Patriots defense has allowed on average 3 passing touchdowns per game. So it does seem like elite or close to elite quarterbacks, above average quarterbacks, if you want to put them in that blanket, have been able to succeed against this Patriots defense so far this season. So I'm not afraid to use Allen by any means. Do I think that Allen is also the type of quarterback who can simultaneously have a great fantasy performance and also make a couple mistakes? Sure. Mm-hmm. I think the Patriots could certainly have a couple turnovers forced in this game. But in terms of points allowed, in terms of sacks, this might not be the best spot to use Patriots defense. I'd be far more inclined to use them on this showdown slate in terms of cash than in season long. I'll admit I dropped Patriots defense this week, which I would even say for season long people who might be like lamenting having to drop Patriots defense, the Patriots schedule gets really tough down the stretch of the season, there's not a lot of matchups where you're going to be going in the week saying like, ooh, this is a great spot for Patriots defense. So I wouldn't even be too like upset about having to cut ties with a unit that's been successful, but there's no more Jets on the Patriots schedule this season. So if you're prorating season-long fantasy, it's not the hardest cut in the world.
Yeah, I've been resistant. I'm going into this week with one of my leagues with 2 defenses, just because I'm not yet emotionally ready to bring myself to cut the Pats, but I'm certainly not playing them tonight against the Bills. But what kind of, when it comes to DFS, I mean, what kind of performance does the Patriots defense, like cash games? Okay, let's just look at cash games, because the value is undeniable, $3,200. What kind of performance though would you need out of this defense point wise to deem it worthwhile for you, and what is realistic? Because like you said, Josh Allen could have a pick or two, or Singletary could fumble, or Judon could have a couple of sacks. Like you could rack up some of those points that way. I don't think you're probably going to get a defensive touchdown. Like that's not something you can bank on, obviously. But the Jets could, or the Bills rather, could very easily go out and put up 30 plus points in Foxborough tonight. So you're weighing one against the other, obviously, and where do you draw the line?
I guess I would just say my fear would be that we see a script a lot like that Baltimore game. And you can see that right on the screen right now. The Patriots had 4 sacks in that game. They forced a turnover, but because they gave up so many points, they still only managed 4 DraftKings points. So at the end of the day, as much as we say like getting pressure is the number one thing you're looking for in terms of a fantasy defense, because pressure leads to sacks, it leads to turnovers, et cetera, et cetera. If you're giving up 35 points, it does not matter. It just doesn't. So I would say even in a cash game, you'd probably need them to score 8 to 10 points, which again is possible. But I do think there are value plays that I prefer. Although I will say Jacoby Myers playing in this game really does kind of throw a wrench into a lot of the prospective value options that we maybe had 5-6 hours ago.
So let's before we get to that, I guess, because I don't think a lot of people, some people will do it for differentiation's sake in tournament plays. Probably not too many people in cash games are going to captain Jacoby Myers, but a lot of people are certainly going to be apt to roster him, and he's going to be popular. He's projected to be in about 40+% of lineups, but your most popular captain plays are unequivocally going to be Josh Allen, Steph Diggs, and Ramondre Stevenson. With Stevenson very likely being the most captained, because now he's not having to compete with Damian Harris for touches tonight. It's which is why like a guy like JJ Taylor, for instance, is going to be very popular tonight as just a $200 punt play. Maybe he'll get a little bit of run, see what happens. But Stevenson, I mean, look at like this. I mean, he routinely is putting up 20 plus fantasy points. He's averaging 17. A lot of those games, obviously, with Harris as the lead back. Stevenson, though, is such a reliable pass catcher that it's not just what he does on the ground. It's the likelihood that he finds the end zone and that it's going to be targeted. Look at this. In just recent game log here, anywhere
it's
between
incredible
5 to 10 times, and he's going to catch the vast majority of those. So Stevenson, I know, is a guy that you wrote about in your article as a captain option, certainly. Is Allen still your favorite option, or are you inclined to go with Stevenson?
No, I think if you actually start baking in the price, I think Stevenson would be my first pick, because he's just someone who cannot be scripted out of this game. I mean, I think coming into the year, there was certainly question marks about which of Damian Harris or Ramondre Stevenson was going to be that sort of just classic Patriots pass catching running back, because it always seemed like there was the lightning and the thunder with the Patriots. You always had the guy who ran between the tackles and then the guy who came in and was Tom Brady's favorite target on third down. And it didn't seem like either of those two guys fit that archetype, but now you've just got Ramondre Stevenson catching everything and breaking 7 tackles after he does catch a pass. I mean, he's been really, really impressive in recent weeks. And in fact, if you go back to week 7, he's got 33 receptions, which is not just the 10th best mark in all of football. It is the second most of any running back in football in that span of time. And that's a stretch that includes the Patriots being on bye in week 10. So he has really just been one of the most highly targeted skill position players in general. And then you factor in that on top of basically just getting the volume of most teams' wide receiver one, he's also going to get goal line carries if such a situation presents itself. He's also played over 70% of the team's offensive snaps in every game but one since week 5, and Damian Harris was active for most of those games. So, we talk about a dual threat quarterback. It's a little bit more rare we get to talk about a dual threat running back, someone who produces as both a running back and a wide receiver. But, Ramondre Stevenson right now is basically prime Alvin Kamara, just from a production standpoint. They're very different players, obviously, when you watch them. But this is what we were seeing from Kamara that made him arguably the most important player in fantasy football for a couple seasons. I mean, this is Christian McCaffrey level usage in the passing game. So I do think it's interesting that last week, I would say Mac Jones was probably more aggressive in throwing downfield against the Vikings than we've seen all season from Mac Jones. And yet still, even with that fundamental philosophy shift, Stevenson finishes with 9 receptions and 10 targets. So it just says to me that there is no script. Well, aside from injury, there is no script where Ramondre Stevenson isn't getting just touches and snaps throughout this entire game. It does not matter if the Patriots are up 14 or down 14. Stevenson is going to be in this game. So I would say he is probably my favorite captain's play, just because you do get to save a couple $1,000. And maybe someone like, Tyquan Thornton, who I had a little bit of interest in prior to the Myers news, is now not somebody who can save a bunch of salary if you do have Josh Allen in that captain spot. So Stevenson, rightfully so, I think will be one of the most popular captain plays tonight.
So I think most lineups are going to have Allen, Diggs, and Stevenson in there, and one of them will be captained, and you'll have the other two flex, and then it comes down to differentiation. So where
not a lot of money left if that's your build.
No,
I'll be honest.
I mean, there's definitely not, but that's where you start to look at Taylor. That's pretty easy at $200, or Tyquan Thornton at $400, or depending on how you feel about the Pats DST at $3,200, and but you don't have to pay up for Jacoby Myers necessarily.
I would say quickly, because I think you bring up an interesting point, which is I think Allen and Stevenson in particular are going to be incredibly popular just because they do bring so many different elements to the table. They're so set in stone going to be involved in their offense. Whereas, there are occasions where Josh Allen has a massive game, and that doesn't necessarily correlate to Stephon Diggs having a big game. So I think of the three, Diggs will probably be the third most used option of that trio.
Yeah.
And sure. Because of the huge amount of money that you have to spend to put all three of those guys into a lineup, I would actually wager there's probably going to be a pretty big difference between the ownership and the captain share of Allen and Stevenson and Stephon Diggs, because I think if you go into this thinking I can only take two of those three, I think Diggs is going to be the odd man out more often than not. So there might actually be an interesting opportunity if you do want to differentiate yourself at the top as opposed to the bottom. I think Diggs might go a little under-owned as a captain tonight, just because there are going to be so many people wanting to fit Allen and Stevenson into a lineup before him.
So projections I'm looking at, and these are only projections. We'll see what the reality is, obviously, in about 2.5 hours. But Diggs and Allen are actually capped in the same, both about 14.5%. With Diggs coming in at about 57% ownership versus Allen and Stevenson, which are right up around 70.
Yeah.
So, a pretty clear drop off, obviously, between those top two, supporting obviously what you're talking about.
Well, there's also that narrative, the classic Patriots narrative, right? Of what are the Patriots going to try to do? They can't take away Josh Allen because he gets the ball snapped into his hands every single play. They're going to try and take away Stephon Diggs.
So
that didn't work last week against the Vikings.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly where I was going to go next. Because historically and traditionally, we're talking about great Patriots defense when we're talking about this. And I don't think this is a great Patriots defense. It's just one that's performed well to everything that we talked about earlier and all the points that you made about the competition they faced. But historically, the Bill Belichick is known for taking away the other team's top option, and Stephon Diggs is clearly that guy. So it would set up seemingly like Isaiah McKenzie is going to go nuts, and he has against the Pats in the past, or Gabe Davis is going to go crazy. Like Fade Diggs, play those two guys, Allen at captain, and put those two in your lineup. But you look at what Jefferson did last week, and Thielen for that matter. So it's not even like, Kirk Cousins, who is no Josh Allen, was out there having to choose between the two. They were just both lighting up the Pats, secondary and everybody else. So it does give you a little bit of pause in terms of how to approach this thing.
Yeah. I mean, look, you even think back to week one. I mean, both Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill had pretty big games against the Patriots. So wide receiver ones have been able to thrive. I mean, a particular tier of wide receiver ones in particular, and Stephon Diggs is obviously in that same tier with your Justin Jeffersons, with your Tyreek Hills. So, I wouldn't be too worried about that narrative if that is something floating around in people's heads.
Yeah, and Diggs is, you're looking at it, 25, 24 points, fantasy points per game. He's top 3 in the NFL in yards and catches and touchdowns. You don't need me to tell you that Steph Diggs is elite, obviously. But so when you get around the obvious plays, who do you decide to attempt to fit in? And the question changes depending on how many builds you're doing. If you're just doing 1 or 2, it's a much different question than if you're doing 10 or 20 or 30 or whatever. But Mac Jones, you're going to want some exposure to. Like maybe, just maybe, he builds off of what he did last week in Minnesota and winds up putting forth a good performance. Jacoby Myers, depending on the severity of that injury, hard to know. I mean, again, he's playing. He said he's playing, but he only played 30% of snaps last week, burned a lot of people, still was reasonably productive when he was out there, but wasn't out there nearly enough. And so what is the trickle down if he can't go or isn't at full strength? Can you depend on Parker or Bourne, either of the tight ends? We know Mac Jones likes Hunter Henry. I would say he's a much better play than a Jonnu Smith, but Jonnu Smith is considerably cheaper, obviously. So if you're looking at the Pat side of the ball specifically, before we even get into like kickers, which I want to talk about in a little bit, how are you sort of gauging all of this around Stevenson? Like, where is the play after Ramondre?
I do think I still have some interest in Aguilar, even if we do want to say that so much of his production last week was dependent on the fact that Myers wasn't available. And that's 100% true. But I do think there's a reasonable chance that this is a relatively high scoring game. I think Buffalo is going to have a relatively easy time putting up points because they have a relatively easy time putting up points against anybody. And I think the Patriots showed a pulse last week. I think that offense showed signs of life. And if they can sort of recreate what they found last week in this matchup with a diminished Buffalo pass rush. I mean, we mentioned Von Miller is not going to be playing in this game. You could have a scenario where the Patriots are playing from behind. And that would lead, of course, to Mac Jones having to drop back and throw the football a little bit more than we're maybe used to seeing with Mac Jones. And Aguilar is that type of player who he's not going to see 8 targets again. I think that's pretty far-fetched, but he's a deep threat. He can change the context of a game very quickly with one single play. And I would say that's the same rationale you would have with a Tyquan Thornton. Unfortunately, I think Thornton is probably going to be in your more like 10 to 12 snap range, where Aguilar is probably more in your 25 to 35 snap range. So the price point, obviously very different. I'm not against using Thornton if you're someone who's just like, hey, I spent up on a bunch of guys. I need to just like take a flyer on someone who has big play potential. Perfectly fine with using Thornton in that capacity because, again, game-changing speed. But I think Aguilar is kind of your mixture of both ceiling and way more floor than someone like Thornton. And again, he has been a deep threat on this team. And I think he could have an impact that way, particularly in the second half of this game, if the Patriots are having to throw the ball.
What about on the other side for the Bills? Some of those, we've already mentioned some of the names, obviously, but some of the mid-price, mid-tier guys, the Davises, the McKenzies, the non-Basses of the world, because again, we will get to kickers. Singletary is part of that as well. And I know you wrote about this game. You write about the showdown every single week, obviously, for DK Nation. Singletary is a guy that you don't want any part of this week.
It's just hard. He's someone who isn't the main goal line back in his own backfield. I mean, when you're just looking at the way those carries inside the 5-yard line have been distributed so far this season for Buffalo, he's got 5 touches in that area of the field. That's nice. Josh Allen has 8 because Josh Allen likes calling his own number. And then you just start looking at, okay, if a guy isn't going to be someone we can just pencil in for a touchdown, like if touchdown expectation is going to be low, where else can he derive his ceiling from? Okay, well, Devin Singletary's been involved in the passing game for large chunks of his career. However, even with this diminished Josh Allen, who should probably be checking down more, or we thought maybe would have to check down more because of his injury, Singletary's received 2 targets or less in 4 of his last 5 games. Singletary has yet to get that 100-yard bonus this season because Buffalo is a team that likes to pass the ball because that's how they thrive. So I think you just keep looking at Singletary and you keep looking at that $7,000 salary. And sure, he could have a big game. He's the starting running back for a team that's projected to score more than 30 points or around 30 points. But more often than not, I'm just left wanting more with Devin Singletary. And I think he's someone who, yes, he has the floor just because he plays a bunch of snaps in a good offense, but he just doesn't bring nearly enough ceiling to me in a game where I do just think it's going to be relatively high scoring. And a lot of guys are going to be getting close to their own ceilings, which are considerably higher than Singletary's.
So who does jump out as someone that you are interested in playing that, again, is kind of mid-range?
It's tough with the Bills because they're really priced up. I mean,
they really are. Like, I mean, I'm just sorry to cut you off. I'm just looking at it. It's Allen, Diggs, Singletary, Davis, Bass, McKenzie, even the Bills DST. That's more expensive than any Patriot other than sort of the big 3 that we mentioned of Mack, Stevenson, and obviously Myers.
I mean, I would say just out of sheer desperation, Dawson Knox is probably where a lot of people are going to go just because he happens to be the cheapest of the very expensive options. He's obviously a red zone threat in his own right, but we talked about Jacoby Myers already, who is unquestionably the wide receiver 1 for the Patriots, unless you want to say Ramondre Stevenson is, which, I'll hear that argument.
Would be fair. Yeah.
But when a team's wide receiver 1 is basically priced exactly the same as Isaiah McKenzie, the Bills wide receiver 3, it really forces your hand about how much exposure you can have to this Buffalo offense. So yeah, Knox is relatively inexpensive. I mean, it's just really tough to kind of find a member of this Bills offense that isn't priced properly or priced up considerably from where most guys are priced on a showdown slate, which is part and parcel as to why that I'm a little more inclined to use one of our lovely kicker friends on this particular slate.
So let's get there because we've got, I don't know, about 10 minutes left and some other things to cover as well. But as I had messaged you, like if ever there was a stack the kickers showdown that, that wasn't like weather influenced, it would be this one because Tyler Bass, and you wrote about it, so I'll let you give the specifics, but Tyler Bass is lighting it up, guys on fire, and has certainly had huge games against the Patriots. And then Nick Folk, who's as reliable as any kicker in the NFL right now, is the kicker for a team that is like one of the worst in the NFL in the red zone and can't seem to finish. And so it would just feel like, hey, easy points for the Patriots. Like they'll move the ball between the 20s and then they're going to stall out and they're going to turn to Folk. Now, I don't know that anyone out there wants to, based on the pricing options, necessarily build a lineup that features both Folk and Bass. Some people are going to do it, obviously, but where do you stand in terms of not playing both? I know that's not your MO, but even working one of these guys in there.
I mean, look, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to playing both in this game if that's really what it came down to, because again, there's just there isn't that obvious value play created by injury in this contest, aside from maybe JJ Taylor, who again, perfectly fine. I mean, if a guy's going to get on the field and be priced at the bare minimum, you have to give him a look. I would say I have Bass above Folk just because I do think the Bills probably score more points in this game. Mm-hmm. And again, it's just really like a perfect storm of influences here with Tyler Bass. The Bills are second in the NFL in yards per drive, yet they're 27th in the NFL in points per red zone trip. And
Hmm.
part of that is Josh Allen being a little careless with the football. The man loves a red zone and end zone interception. But a lot of it is Buffalo has just not been able to convert their drives into 7 points many times this season. In fact, over 20% of their drives have ended in a field goal, which is a top 3 rate in football, which is why Tyler Bass leads the NFL in extra points and overall points scored. I mean, this is just someone who he scores a lot of points. And obviously you're not going to get the 6 field goal game that you got a couple weeks ago in Cleveland every single week. And, Buffalo's had the great pleasure of playing 2 consecutive indoor games. This is not going to be an indoor game. It's a outdoor game on the East Coast in December. Generally speaking, those aren't ideal kicker situations, but you've got a Patriots defense that's been very good at sort of bending but not breaking, as they say, and really not conceding that many points in the red zone. So I do just think if this is a game where Buffalo, like we've seen time and time again, doesn't have a lot of friction moving the ball between the 20s, they might have some problems converting those drives into touchdowns. And that's where Tyler Bass comes in. And really, he only needs like 2 made field goals and a couple extra points, and you're pretty happy with that performance. And yeah, Nick Folk, similar boat. I mean, I believe he is tied for the league lead in made field goals. He might be like 1 behind Justin Tucker. I'm a little rusty on my kicker stats. I won't lie.
It feels right though. Let's go with it.
But he's definitely top 3. And I just read that the Patriots have activated another kicker tonight so that he can.
I saw that.
He can rest his leg. He doesn't have to worry about kickoffs. Apparently,
I guess. Yeah. I mean, I didn't dig into it. It's probably the
seems
reason.
odd, but I just anything the Patriots do now, I'm like, sure, whatever.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, Nick Folk, very similar situation. I think the Patriots have had a lot of trouble converting their drives into touchdowns this season. That has led to a lot of Nick Folk field goals. He's basically automatic from inside 45 yards, as long as it isn't incredibly windy, which it's not going to be tonight. It's not going to be like that Week 11 game against the Jets. And Buffalo's got a pretty good defense, and they've been able to limit, again, bend but not break. So I do think this could be a game where guys are going to get their touchdowns, obviously, but I think there's going to be enough scoring drives where each kicker might have some field goal attempts. Again, I would lean Bass over Folk, but if you got to play both, this might be one of those slates where I would condone that.
So we've really leaned into the DFS of this game, and it makes sense with $1.5 million Thursday night showdown, $500,000 going to first place, and there'll be hundreds of thousands of people playing, obviously, or tens of thousands, already in the contest as I look at it. But DraftKings Sportsbook, we have not touched on at all. And the Patriots, as I pull it up here, the Patriots, where's football? Here we go. Patriots in this game are, as you noted, the spread has moved a little bit.
Oh, wow.
They are nevertheless being home. They are 3.5-point underdogs in this game going against Buffalo. The total is 44, which honestly feels a little bit low to me.
I agree.
What is your outlook here on this one from a betting perspective?
I would say my favorite bet would just be the over. I feel I'm in lockstep with you on that. I just think this game is going to be higher scoring than people think. I think, again, justifiably, with how the Patriots defense has been in recent weeks, there's a lot of respect for that unit. But I think we have to acknowledge that Buffalo, even with a quarterback, one of the major storylines in the last 4 weeks has just been how banged up Josh Allen is, how many mistakes Josh Allen has made, how many throws Josh Allen is missing. And yet the Bills still score 30 points every single week. So with the Patriots looking like they might kind of have their stuff together on offense, the Vikings, not the best defense in the world. They've been pretty susceptible to giving up, high yards per opponent passing attempt throughout the entirety of the season. So I think the Bills have a better secondary than the Vikings do, but I really do think the Patriots can kind of hang around in this one. Or again, even if you think the Patriots are going to win this game, I think the Patriots are more likely to have to win this game like 27-24 than they are winning it 17-10. I really don't think that's going to be the way they win this game. So I like the over. That's probably my favorite bet on the board. I am surprised how small this line got. I think it opened at 5, right?
I don't remember where it opened. It's somewhere around there though.
I mean, I remember seeing it at 4.5. I think on Tuesday, Matt LaMarca, Glash, and I were looking at it, and we were fairly confident with it sitting at 4. It was not going to get to 3 or 3.5. Certainly not 3, but I was pretty confident it wouldn't get to 3.5 either. But here we are, a couple hours to kick off. It's at 3.5. I would just take Buffalo. I know that there are some concerns with how Allen's looked, but again, I think the raw production, even with him not giving his best performances, has still been there. And I just think they have more answers than the Patriots do in this particular game. But I like the over more than I like just taking the Bills.
Yeah, I mean, full disclosure, I'm not betting on this game. I'll do a whole lot of DFS. There'll be a bunch of lineups being made, but I'm not actually betting on this game. If I were to, though, I mean, I'd be taking the Bills. I'd be taking the over. I'd be taking the Bills on the money line. Like I'd hope to be wrong across the board. Well, I don't care if I'm wrong about the total, but I'd hope to be wrong, obviously, about the Patriots losing this game entirely with my bias at play here. But 3.5, I mean, on the road in New England, I don't know. I feel like the Patriots defense is getting a little more respect than it necessarily deserves. How about, before we get out of here, any sort of props that jump out at you, especially in light of, who we know is going to play and all of that?
Yeah, I think that for me, I always love a good first touchdown scorer prop. I think that's just one of my faves in general. Haven't looked at the board yet, so we'll do this live, but let's see. Who do we like here for first touchdown? So it's usually below anytime scorer. There we go. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, Stevenson just makes a lot of sense with how involved he is. I think he's justified to be the favorite. Let's see what else we got here. You know what? Hunter Henry at 19-1.
I see. It's funny you went there because I was in sort of in lockstep with you theme wise. I was thinking about Dawson Knox, and I know he only has 2 touchdowns the whole year. But I just like Dawson Knox I don't know about first score, but Dawson Knox anytime touchdown feels like just a great bet against the Patriots tonight. It really does. I feel like he's just apt to score in prime time while I'm watching. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I think, again, you can see in these prices, they probably expect Buffalo to score the first touchdown. So I think there's a little bit more value baked into the Patriots. Yeah. If you do want to be optimistic about that, but even Gabe Davis, 11-1, doesn't seem terrible to me. I mean, big receiver, often is a threat in the red zone. Yep. But yeah, you know what? Generally speaking, if you just want to bet both tight ends for first touchdown scored, I don't hate that. That's not a bad way to live your life.
How about, we'll skip passing props. Although I will say 265.5 for Josh Allen. I'd probably take the over on that.
What's Stevenson's receiving props here?
Stevenson receiving prop is
so 37.5. I'm thinking receptions is probably 4.5 or 5.5, if I had to guess.
4.5. Yep.
Ooh, you know what? I'd take the over on 4.5. I think if Buffalo takes a lead in this game, like I said, Stevenson's proven time and time again he can be used in the passing game, and Mac Jones has been more than happy to dump it off to Ramondre Stevenson. So I think over 4.5 receptions is a good way to go there.
I'd take over on Jacoby Myers 4.5. I would take over on Hunter Henry 2.5. I think Mac is not shy about who he leans on. This is not imaginative play calling that we see with the New England Patriots this year.
Taking umbrage with a certain pencil behind the ear and his play calling abilities.
Oh, I mean, everybody knows he's in over his head. Bring him into the Zoom. I'll tell him to his face. This is a disaster. So I don't know. That's kind of how I'm looking at it. It should be an interesting game. It should absolutely be interesting. We are going to wrap in just a second. There's only one NBA game tonight to stay true to the whole sports thing that we do on Thursdays. Sure. Dallas and Detroit, pardon me. Do you have any thought at all on that game, whether it's a DFS play you really like or a bet?
I mean, DFS is interesting at this point. It seemed like there was going to be some value open.
No one else.
Yeah, it seemed like there was going to be some value opened up. Christian Wood was ruled questionable middle of the day with an illness. It kind of felt like one of those, it's Detroit, we're just going to give Christian Wood the night off sort of injury designations. However, he will be active tonight.
He's in.
I don't know if we've heard yet about Jaden Ivey. I don't think so. I think that news will come in about half an hour. So if Ivy isn't playing, that opens up a ton of options on the Pistons side of the ledger. I think like Bojan Bogdanovic, even someone like, it hurts, but like Killian Hayes, it's not usually fun to watch, but he will have the ball in his hands quite a bit. With Dallas, it's tough. I mean, I think Luka is in a flex position on the Showdown slate tonight is $14,400. So to captain him, you got to pay more than 21 grand on the Showdown slate. And I can't look you in the eye and say it's a bad idea because
or that most people won't do it.
Exactly. I mean, just 40% usage rate for Dallas. I mean, time and time again, they've proven that that's how they want to run their offense. It's entirely through Luka. And I don't think the Pistons have the bodies to stop him. So if you want to take an approach of like Luka in the captain spot, a lot of value in the flex positions with the Pistons players, maybe like an Alec Burks who might be like doubling as a point guard tonight. I think that's a relatively good way to go.
I just looked. Luka is projected to be, owned in 90+% of lineups, but captained in 34.5%, which candidly, I would have thought it'd be higher.
Yeah.
I really
you could have convinced me.
Yeah. Dwight Powell. I'll throw him out as that's a nice cheap play to get into your lineups.
2,200, I think, tonight. Like he's pretty affordable.
Yeah. All right, time to go. Patriots and Bills will kick off in, as we sit here, about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you got some time. You can go back, relive, rehash, rewatch the show, get all sorts of advice, in particular on DFS lineups, maybe a little bit of, thoughts on season long and whether or not you should be hanging on to that Patriots defense, as we talked about at the top of the show, and obviously some betting thoughts toward the tail end as well. But thanks to Eamon, thanks to Daniel, no thanks to Jeff. Usually see him on Thursdays, and that's not today. I was going to say no more, but I'd like to believe we'll see him again. But that's not happening today anyway. But you know what? We didn't miss him. Gary and Thorne and I, we filled the time quite easily, Moose. Hope you're out there watching. Gary, and thanks, buddy. We'll catch up soon.
See you, Koff.